In Escape from Tarkov, one of the most PvP-heavy locations is Customs Dorms. Located in the southern center of the map, it consists of two long buildings, one 2 stories tall and the other 3 stories tall. They contain a decent amount of loot, have a chance to be the spawn location of the boss or Shala, and are the primary location of many of the game's task objectives. With all those characteristics, they attract a large amount of player traffic, and in turn, a lot of PvP. So today, I'm going to be providing you with a guide of everything you need to know to be more successful in your dorms fights. Before we get into it, you can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/JohnnyBusak or on TikTok under the same name. I'd like to start by saying that this video will be focused primarily on solo play. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about can be applied interchangeably between solo and squad play, but squad play has many more variables to be considered, so just assume that all the scenarios I propose are from the perspective of a solo. Additionally, I recently uploaded a close-range PvP guide, which I've linked in the description. Everything in that video can be applied to dorms PvP, so I highly suggest you check that out as well. First up, let's talk about the layout of dorms. As I stated in the intro, dorms consist of both a 2-story and a 3-story building. In between the two is a small parking area and courtyard devoid of much cover. Towards the north is a driveway, leading towards the main road which cuts customs right down the center. We'll be referring to this side of dorms as Ice Cream Side, named after the ice cream stand just outside of 3-story. On the opposite side, we have the map edge and the map's vehicle extract, listed as Dorms VX in-game. We'll refer to this side of dorms as Car Side. To define the sides of each buildings opposite the courtyard, we'll use the name Backside for each. As for the shapes of the buildings, 2-story is a straight line, while 3-story is a backwards L shape. To define the bottom, shorter end of the L, we'll use the name Elbow. The third floor of 3-story doesn't fully follow the L shape, as the elbow area consists of a balcony. At 2-story, first floor Ice Cream Side is gated off, requiring you to opt for a different entrance if you want to access the rest of the building. Now that we've gone through the basics of the layout, we can talk about entrances. I'll split these up into 2 sections, doors and windows. Let's start with doors. Remembering which of these are locked and which of these are unlocked is one of the first things you should focus on when learning dorms, as it'll save you tons of frustration when trying to enter or exit the building. Starting with 3-story, first, second, and third are all unlocked on Ice Cream Side. On Car Side, only second floor is unlocked. Toward the courtyard, the main entrance spawns open. At 2-story Ice Cream Side, only first floor is unlocked, while on Car Side, only second floor is unlocked. Similar to 3-story, 2-story has a main entrance facing the courtyard which spawns open as well. None of the locked doors at dorms which lead outside are possible to be unlocked. When it comes to windows, there are plenty of options that are possible to be jumped through. Learning windows is just as important as doors, as they often allow a bit more cover than entering directly through the end of the building. On the backside of 3-story, you can easily jump in through the bathroom window by jumping on the blue barrel. To the right, you can jump into the third window, but it requires a crouch jump and a high strength level. On Car Side, you can jump through the window furthest left, but be careful of getting stuck on the beds just inside. Toward the courtyard and at the tip of the elbow, you can shoot out the window and jump right in off of the trash bags. Over at the backside of 2-story, you'll see another stretch of trash bags, jumping off of which will let you into the bathroom. If you look a couple windows down to the left, you'll see a small blue barrel. Jump on this and you'll have access to one of the bedrooms, but it'll be behind Ice Cream Side gate. Some of these can be tricky to nail with lower strength levels, so be sure to try figuring them out in an offline raid first so you don't end up stuck with your stamina burnout after jumping repeatedly. With entrances out of the way, we'll move on to exits. Of course, any entrance can also be an exit, but windows allow for many more exits and repositioning opportunities from higher floors. There are too many of these to go through all of them, but any window that isn't obstructed and can be broken has the potential to be used as an exit. One of my favorites is the tip of elbow, 3-story second floor. If you break the window and jump out, you can land on the car below, turn around, and jump right back into first floor. Another is at 2-story Ice Cream Side towards backside. You can easily jump out the window and drop down a floor, aiming for the piece of plywood to avoid any leg damage. Both buildings also have windows facing their backsides and their stairwells, which are very easy to jump through. I suggest running throughout each building, testing the various window exits there are. You'll be able to determine which you can exit through most easily, as well as which you'll take the least damage from. Overall, these can be extremely useful for repositioning in a fight, or even confusing the enemy and catching them off guard when they suspect you to be elsewhere.
I'm dead.
Next, let's talk about loot hotspots. Since dorms is tight quarters, if someone's there, you'll usually find out quickly once you're inside, regardless of where they are. But there are a few rooms in the buildings which hold higher value than the rest, and therefore higher PMC traffic. The most contested room of all is Marked Room, which is the last door on the right of 3-story Car Side. It requires the dorm's marked key to be open, but has a chance to spawn many of the items needed for the game's final task. The other important rooms are referred to as safe rooms, as they each have a safe inside which can hold different valuables. These rooms are 204 and 214 in 3-story, and 105, 110, and 114 in 2-story. Each of these require a key and tend to be the rooms players flock to when looking for loot. When entering one of the buildings, a quick check of if these rooms are open can be a good indicator if an enemy is inside or has recently been there. When talking about weapons to use in dorms, there's really one guideline to follow. Shorter is better. As I mentioned before, dorms is primarily closed spaces everywhere inside. Obstacles blocking the halls, small rooms, and tight doorways will cause your PMC to constantly be obstructed when using a longer gun, making flowing through combat very difficult. Shorter weapons won't have this issue, but usually correlate with higher recoil, aside from SMGs, which typically have lower recoil in the first place. Guns like the MP7 and P90 really thrive at dorms, as they're small in size, have a high fire rate, and retain accuracy even at the longest sightlines down halls. If you're running something like an M1A, RSAS, or a long mutant, you're probably better off avoiding the interior of dorms, opting for positioning outside instead. Another thing worth considering is extended or drum magazines. Since fights tend to be so close in dorms, you often won't have a chance to reload before an enemy pushes you. Extended magazines help to give you a cushion in these situations, lengthening the time between reloads and lessening the chance of an enemy pushing you during your reload animation. When PvPing in dorms, you'll usually encounter two types of players. One is the player that runs around, repositioning constantly, trying to get closer to take out their opponent, and the other is the player that creeps around and holds an angle, remaining silent until the moment they take their shot. From my experience over the years, most players gravitate towards the play style of holding angles, so it's important to know what angles are held most commonly. If you have some experience in Tarkov PvP, you'll probably know that right-handed angles are held most commonly, so this narrows down our options quite a bit. Starting with 3-story, first and second floor are pretty similar. Towards elbow, you'll either have players peeking from the pole in the middle of the hall, or right where the hallway ends and elbow begins. Towards ice cream side, you'll have people commonly holding an angle from the last door on the right. For third floor, ice cream side is pretty much the same, but players like to sit in the second door on the right at the top of the stairs too. Also, if you're moving up to third from second, there's a shelf straight ahead which players will hold a right hand on. Down towards the marked room, the hall that leads towards the balcony is also commonly held. Lastly, for the stairwell, players will often hold right hands between floors, facing the floor below them. As for 2-story, in first floor you pretty much have to deal with the dining area toward car side being held, and the door behind the gated area near the 105 safe room. Second floor is simple, with either end of the hall being commonly held. When entering these buildings, these angles should be the first places you take a quick glance of. If you do see someone holding an angle, there's many ways to take them out, which we'll expand upon moving forward. But first, we need to talk about repositioning. If an enemy is in your vicinity in dorms, the last thing you want to do is sit still and let the enemy trap you in your position. You want to be the one driving the fight, repositioning while your opponent is stuck in place. But you'll probably realize this is pretty tough when the majority of what you have to work with is a few long hallways. Obviously, if an enemy is at one end of the hall, running straight from the other end directly towards them doesn't make much sense. It'll be a pointless move for you and an easy kill for them. We do have lots of ways around this though. Of course, some of the halls have solid cover you can make use of when moving from one location to another, but we also have doors that can be opened at nearly every room which open to the hallway. Doors don't serve as completely solid cover, as rounds can still penetrate through them, but they'll allow for visual cover, buying you an extra fraction of a second when moving from cover to cover. It can be a good habit to leave a few rooms open when you suspect an enemy is nearby, in the event you'll need them later. In addition to this, the rooms themselves can serve as repositioning opportunities. Consider a doorway at the top of the stairs, such as 3-story second floor. If you want to check if an enemy is somewhere in the hall, you need to do a pretty risky peek one direction or the other. If the door in front of you is open, you can instead run directly into it, just turning your head to check down the hall, and then run back to check the other direction. The same can be done for 2 open rooms directly across from each other. Of course, you won't always have the opportunity to open rooms preemptively. Thankfully, doors in EFT can be opened while in motion, so you can run by a door to open it if needed. You can also choose to close yourself inside a room to prevent receiving damage from grenades, which are very often thrown down the hall in dorms PvP. On the topic of grenades, we can talk about how to use them as well as prefiring for a more aggressive method of repositioning in dorms. Let's say you're in a room at one end of dorms, the enemy is at the other end, and you don't have an immediate location to relocate to safely. This is where grenades can come in handy. If you throw a grenade out of your room down the hall, the enemy will likely retreat into the closest room until the explosion occurs. This buys you a second or two to exit your room and reposition, either to a safer location or towards the enemy. It can be hard to tell where a grenade lands when in a tight interior due to the way the grenade collision audio works, so this is almost always guaranteed to work if your throw is precise enough. A good grenade choice for this is the M67, as it has a 5-second delay before exploding. Using one of these will keep the enemy retreating for a longer period, allowing you much more time to reposition. The same logic can be applied to pre-firing and blind firing. If you know the enemy's location, firing shots in their vicinity periodically can keep them from peeking or moving from their cover. Anytime you're doing something to keep the enemy in one place, you're making it easier for yourself to win the fight. So far, everything we've talked about assumes that you know where the enemy is located already. But what about scenarios where you're not sure exactly where the enemy is, or if there's even an enemy in the building? Expanding upon what I said earlier about running from room to room while turning your head, there are other ways to know where enemies are or have been. For example, at the beginning of every raid, the same doors are open, closed, or locked. Memorizing all of these can take some time, but can give you a good idea if someone is in or has been in the building once you go inside. You can also look for scav or player bodies through the halls. If you see a PMC body and it hasn't been looted, you can almost guarantee a player is still either in the building or nearby, as most players wouldn't leave a body unlooted. Both of these are effective for developing a very general understanding of what's going on in the building once you're inside, but we should also mention ways to enter the building in the first place. If you don't know if a player is inside, you don't want to casually walk in the building as if it's clear. A great way to enter from ice cream or car side is to open the door from the side of it so you're not exposed. You can then run back and forth, turning your head to look down the hall. You'll potentially catch sight of the enemy, or maybe they'll fire a few shots, giving themselves away. From there, you can enter the building to at least start progressing your way inside. In the case of 3-story ice cream side, first, second, and third floor, and 2-story car side, second floor, the first door on the left spawns open, allowing you a quick first room to run into as long as the player hasn't closed it. Utilizing jumping through window entrances at either building will also usually to a quick confirmation of enemy location. Since jumping is loud in EFT, you'll typically hear players react to hearing the sound once you're in. You can also use grenades to confirm enemy location as well. If you're unsure if an enemy is sitting in a room down the hall, throw a grenade or two to see if you hear them shuffle to back off the grenade, or see if they close the door to avoid the explosion. There's VoIP too, which doesn't always guarantee a response, but it's worth a shot. But let's expand a little more on the concept of audio. One of the benefits of getting inside the building quickly in Dorms PvP is that the outside ambient audio gets cut off. This makes any movement inside the interior much more present from your perspective and makes it easier to audibly be able to tell the difference between movement outside and inside. Once you're in, you can listen to the tonality of footsteps to tell the difference between a sound that's either on your floor or a floor above you. With the way Tarkov audio currently works, you usually can't hear sounds below you while inside buildings, but can clearly hear sounds above you. Keep this in mind and test it out for yourself to understand the differences. Stairs can be a dangerous area to be around, as a player coming up the stairs from below you often can't be heard until it's too late. You can also listen to the material that a footstep is taking place on. The real standouts are tiles in bathrooms and the metal stairs at the ends of the buildings. Outdoor footsteps will also be very prominent, as you'll usually hear grass or bush movement.
Like that M700, I think.
Listening for jumping can also give away when a player is getting on top of or over an obstacle, such as the furniture blocking the hall towards ice cream side of 3-story, second floor. Looting is also pretty loud and can be heard both when you're nearby or underneath a player doing so. You should always keep an ear out for all these audio cues, as they can give you the upper hand in knowing where your enemy is, often before they even know about you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, everything I'm teaching you is in the case of being a solo player, but the enemies you face may be a solo, duo, trio, squad, or more. While this may seem daunting, there are lots of ways to still maintain an advantage against groups of opponents. The biggest one of these is avoiding pinches, or situations where you're between two players with nowhere to retreat. A great way to prevent this is to never enter a room that has a single exit. When you do so, you're risking a situation where one player can fish you out with a grenade while the other takes shots. If you're in a room with a second exit, like a window, you always have that as an opportunity for repositioning. A good goal when repositioning is to shoot for a location where you have multiple enemies targeting you from a single direction. Usually, the opponent that's further back will not take shots, as they want to avoid team killing their teammate who's in front of them. This serves as a positive to you because it shifts your encounter to a 1v1 temporarily. Another goal can be repositioning in a way which splits the enemies up far enough where they can't be both confronting you at the same time. Accomplishing this usually takes a bit of estimation and split-second decisions, as you have to take actions which force the enemy to change their plan. A good way to do this is changing floors, running around the outside of the building to change which side the fight is taking place, or simply using grenades to make space. The main advantage of a squad over a solo is the ability to pinch, so your main goal as a solo should be countering or preventing that. Now, what happens if you're heading to dorms but already hear some fighting going on inside? You'll be considered a third party, but the majority of what we've talked about up until this point still applies. You'll want to treat it like you're fighting a squad, avoiding being put in a position where you're between two or more players. The big extension of this is finding which position each team is fighting from. An easy way to figure this out is through audio, specifically impacts. You'll want to identify both where the gun's being shot from, as well as where the bullets are impacting. You won't always be able to hear both of these clearly, but if you do, you'll have a good idea of where a player is shooting from and the position of what they're shooting at is. If you can't make this out, look for muzzle flashes through windows. Try to time your initial push during a period where gunfire is taking place, so the enemy's attention isn't as much focused on their surroundings, giving you the ability to catch them off guard. A big advantage as a third party is having the time to understand the situation prior to engaging. You don't have to rush in and confirm every kill for any reason other than ego. Take your time in your approach and gather as much information as you can. The more you know about the conflict that's taking place, the better your chances of being the last one standing. So let's say you've made it into dorms, you know your enemy's location, you have the advantage, and all you need to do is finish the fight. There's not really one answer on how to do this, since every scenario is different, but I can give you some different directions you can take. As I mentioned earlier on, grenades can be used to fish a player out of position, causing them to stagger while looking for better cover. This gives you a chance for an easy few shots into them. Another option, if a player is in a room, is to strafe past while pre-firing. The key to this is to not stop moving. Your advantage by being in the hall is the ability to be mobile while the enemy is stuck in place. If an enemy is holding an angle, use your repositioning to catch them from a direction they don't have a sightline on. If that isn't possible, force them out of their position. Dorms fights are best handled at mid to close range. You'll be able to control the fight using movement to your advantage to time shots. Move to get eyes on the enemy, take a couple shots, then keep moving, and repeat until the fight is won. If you find yourself in a situation where you and the opponent are still holding angles while shooting down the hall, it's usually a toss-up who's going to win, as you're just waiting for one person or the other to land a face shot.
Cam running in the first front door. Nice.
Good shit.
And that's going to wrap up my guide for Dorms PvP. There's obviously infinite variables that can be accounted for while in Tarkov's PvP, but hopefully everything I've highlighted in this video will bring a bit more clarity to see how you should handle PvP in Dorms. If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.